Hi everyone, welcome back to the Career Discovery Sessions. This week we're going to be speaking to Ze'ev Feigis, the director of Borough Architects, a small architectural practice based in Cambridge, UK. Thank you so much for being here today. It's really great having you. Uh, I want to begin by asking you about your career choice. When did you decide that this was the profession for you?
I I graduated from school at 18 and I went to serve in the Israeli army, and that took me 4 years. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished school, not even during school. I had some ideas and I learned all sorts of weird stuff that has nothing to do with my current profession. And it's only towards the end of my military service that I kind of bumped into this idea, and I realized that it might be something that's um, of interest. So it wasn't really planned or anything. It's kind of an accidental, a good accident, really. I read a book um, in a university library whilst I was in the army, and that book kind of led me to think about architecture. So the book is a kind of a French philosopher's book, and it was written for a little uh, society of architects in France. And it was written more than 100 years ago, I guess. But it's some sort of a dialogue between Socrates, or the ghost of Socrates, and one of his students. And as I was reading it, it kind of explained what it seemed to be a thing that I would like to try. And then, you start scratching into it. You don't really know what you're doing. There's no, like, I didn't go to become, there's no apprenticeships or anything like that. But so I just scratched into it and into studying it. And once you go into studying, you kind of just slide into it and become a bit more accustomed and understand what's happening.
So can
So
you
there's a
expand? Sorry, keep going.
yeah, go ahead.
Can you expand on the education? So I know a lot of people might want to go into this field, but what kind of certificates do you need to have, and what kind of educational
Hmm.
milestones do you?
So I'll explain to you the way the system works in the UK at the moment. I'm saying at the moment because it might change in a few years. But in the UK, the system is split between a bachelor's and a master's degree. So the first thing you do is apply to university to do your what's named RBA Part 1. RBA is the Royal Institute of British Architects, and they're giving the definitions of what an architect needs to know, understand. So the first degree that you do is like 3 years in uni in the Department of Architecture. You apply for it. You do your first 3 year, your first batch. You end up with a certificate, with a BA, with a bachelor's degree, and then you're considered to be an RBA Part 1, which allows you to go and do a year out, or a year in practice. So you're expected to go and either work in practices or have other architectural experience. So you'd see that, you go and study something, but then you go and try it out. Now you don't necessarily, you don't start, 3 years, you don't start designing buildings. You might, and it happened, and it doesn't mean that you can't, because you end up doing kind of basic stuff. So you're given to work on some drawings. You've been given a drawing and say, can you amend this, add some doors, design the toilets or something. And it's not great. It's like when you read a book, you think you're going to change the world, and then you end up designing toilets. It's not really what you've been expecting. But you can do other things as well. You can go elsewhere and start, work in the field of architecture, say, I don't know, I know of people who went abroad or volunteered in some places, and they actually had hands-on experience, which I'd imagine, if you're thinking of learning how to design things, you might as well want to do them, to feel them. And that's a really good experience in my view. It'd be better than just going and working for someone else that will tell you what to do. But there is different ways of doing that. After that year out, you will be going back to uni if you want to. Again, once you have your bachelor's degree, you can decide you want to do, I don't know, you want to go and study theater, and having some sort of a background in architecture, it will take you places. But if you do want to become an architect, eventually you'll have to go back to uni, do a master's degree, which will give you, after 2 years, will give you an RBA part two. And by the time you finish that, you'd be entitled to call yourself an architectural assistant. So you're not an architect yet, but you're an assistant. And then you go back to, say, working as an assistant in an office, and you'll be given a bit more opportunities to design. Again, this depends on the type of practice and the type of work they do. And after a while, again, you can go and work elsewhere. But in order to become an architect, you have to have some sort of an experience, and you have to do one more course. It's not there yet. And that course is called RBA Part 3, where you actually learn about the mechanisms that architecture works within. So there's contracts to do. You have to deal with clients. So what's the relationship with the clients? What the relationships with the people who build this, with the contractors. So contractor by definition has a contract with a client, and architect is sitting somewhere in between. You need to understand about the way that the cost of the building works, time. So there are different aspects to the construction itself that you need to understand, and that course will give you some indication on that. And after you finish that and you get an exam and you pass the exam, then you can register. And then in order to register, you have to have other the RIBA, which tells you what you need to know. There is the ARB, which tells you that you have to register. In order to register, ARB is the Architects Registration Board. And if you want to register as an architect, as a chartered architect, you have to have all sorts of arrangements in place, like PI insurance. So to become an architect, you have to be insured, because then you'll go and work for clients, and the clients want to know that if something goes wrong, and it's usually quite a large investment when you're working in architecture, you've got a back, you've got something to assure that if something goes wrong, they'll be compensated in a way. So all that long process is just to be able to call yourself an architect. To do architecture, you don't need any of that. So all that long story, if someone listens to that and say, I want to do architecture, you don't have to become an architect, forget it. But this would be the professional way of becoming an architect. You cannot call yourself an architect until you've done all that.
So these certifications are optional, or do you have to have them?
If you want to be an architect, again, the protection, the ARB, the Architects Registration Board, is protecting that. Once you registered, you get the right to use the title architect, the title. So the law protects the use of the title, meaning what you're meant to call yourself. So if someone's saying, I can design your house, and you're asking him, are you an architect? If they went through all that long process, they'll say, yes, we've got, the registration and the part 1 and part 2 and part 3 and the certificate and the PI insurance and everything. Yes, we're architects, we've done that. But someone might tell you, I've done several of these, and you're like, so you're an architect? You're like, no, I'm a technician or I'm an assistant, but I do these things. So it depends what you want to do. If it comes to larger buildings and they're complicated, rather than an extension or a loft conversion or something like that, you might want to choose to take an architect. And the reason for that, and it's important to say, is that there is some sort of an assurance of quality rather than, it wouldn't be cheaper, it wouldn't be better. It just means that someone who's done that has the education that brought him to the position, this professional position, when he does something, he considers different aspects. And I'll start with cultural aspects. Why would you do your extension like this or like that? Understanding of cost, understanding of planning implications, what are the policies, what you're allowed, not allowed to do. We need to know a lot of stuff, but someone might know this stuff just by doing it, and the law doesn't require you to use an architect. That would be another type of protection that in the UK, it's not necessary. So there are some um, famous people, designers who are not architects, but they're doing fantastic jobs, or people who don't even describe themselves as such, but still do fantastic stuff. And the title is something completely different. That's what I'm trying to say.
So, moving on to the day to day of an architect, what is it that you do in your office or currently during COVID?
At home, yeah. um, so, being an architect, the main thing you'd be expecting to do is to design buildings or other things. So it depends on how specific you are with what you do. Um, there are different types of buildings, but there are also the space between buildings, so or the surrounding of the building. So you can design landscape, you can design urban areas, you can design the buildings themselves, or even just the space between two buildings. It doesn't. It's not restricted to that thing that we call a building, the object. But you would be designing it via all sorts of media. So first you'd be imagining it. So you can imagine me sitting there and kind of imagining all day things. But then you have to produce something in order to be able to communicate it outwards. And therefore we'll be sketching and drawing and 3D modeling either via the computer or take a piece of cardboard or clay or wood and put them together and try to express the way that you're thinking of it. And then you have to talk to people about it. You like have to convince them. I think it's better to have a roof like that than a roof like that because. So you'll be talking to clients over the phone or via Zoom. Now there's, with Zoom with a share screen, it's actually quite good because you can, upload some drawings or some modeling and start showing things around, a lot of chasing of other people who are supposed to approve your work. So if I'm applying for a new building for a client, the council, the local council, have to say yes or no. So other than telling them why it's okay to do what I'm doing, which I can write and submit it and they'll read it, I need to sometimes convince them that, look, that dormer window might want to be a bit different. And these are discussions, a lot of chasing people that don't answer phone calls because it takes a long time to run through those processes.
And according to you, what is the most challenging aspect from the things you've listed or else?
Me sitting and thinking like that in the office, it's that very quiet moment that goes, and then you have to tell everyone what you think about things. Now, if you're trying to convince, say, a client that this type of roof is better than the other, you have to explain it, and the client's like, no, I want that roof. I'm like, no, it's not a good roof, you want that one. So you have to explain it. Or if the council doesn't think that the way that you've shaped a certain corner of a building doesn't really matter, you have to do some persuasion. But even if you manage to prove that there is a better way of doing things, it doesn't mean that people will actually accept it. And there's a lot of legwork there. And sometimes frustrations to accept that, okay, we're not going to do it in the right way or the better way. You'll have to compromise, or you'll just have to fight your corner, or you'll just have to give up. So there's a lot of frustration in not getting what you think is best for, I don't know, for the city. Okay, I think that if I show someone a photo of how the building might look, that will convince them that the way that it sits in the street is a proper way of addressing a public space, doesn't it? I'm trying to use some words from the profession. So, and they say, oh, no, we don't like those big shop front windows. We want something else. And you're like, but it's a commercial street and you want to support the high street and it's, difficult. You can go into explanation. And they're like, no, we don't like it. And that's the end. Now it depends whether, how much power they have over you and how much they're willing to be persuaded. And sometimes you're just like, maybe we'll have to work around it, or just have to accept that we're not going to get the right way of doing it. And
Stemming off that, what do you think is a personality type that fits the job role?
you need to think both horizontally, as in, like have a wide ranges of understandings, a bit of everything, but also, some in-depth understanding, and switching between looking at something, close, like in detail, and seeing it from afar, taking like a perspective, taking a couple of steps back and understanding, the wider implications, understanding things from a policy point of view, kind of very high levels of understanding, or cultural point of view, and physical of how things are actually working. You need to be able to have the flexibility, the versatility of moving in and out of these things. Like, you have to understand, how it looks, how it relates to its environment, how it actually acts, how the person's actually going to use it. And again, back to a lot of communication. So actually, building buildings is about talking to a lot of people. So you have to be really open and talky and be able to manifest many of your thoughts through discussion. That's another important bit.
And do you have any advice for our future architects? How should they approach this?
Aspiring architects, future architect. Okay, if you're an architect, if you know you're going to be an architect in the future, that's one aspect. If you want to become an architect, and you're asking me how am I going to improve my chances of becoming an architect, that's another question. I will start with the second, and I'd say that if you want to get to a course, eventually apply to university and get a place in it, I guess that what they would want to see is your understanding of the world we live in, the way that you observe and look at how people and spaces, how people use spaces, how people perceive spaces. It could be a sacred space like a church or a synagogue or a mosque, or a church, and the way that the windows in the church are up there, you can't really see outside. So, and there is this, what we call this divine light that's coming in, and you look at those things and you realize that people sitting on those pews in the church are like, they look forward because the whole space is aligning them to look forward towards the cross. And when you look at these things, not at the building itself as much as the way that people are using it, even, most of the day you'll be sitting and thinking how people will be using the toilet. So that's, the mundane against the divine. But if you're looking at these things, you have to start thinking. And I think what I've written to you, what I've told you, is that thinking, we need to put those thoughts, I call it on paper, but at least have some sort of remnants, accumulate those those thoughts that you have whilst you're observing the way people use the world, the building, the places. And I said, if you want to get like a sketchbook or something, doesn't really matter, like napkins, post-it, and start scribbling these thoughts, scribbling those little windows in the church, or the size of the grave in a graveyard with the lines, and anything that you collect out of, you're walking in a supermarket and you're thinking that there is something interesting in the way that people are moving their hand or having to crouch and go down and up to get the milk bottle or whatever. If that's what drives you and that's what makes you think about these things, just scribble it, just sketch it, just put it in a little sketchbook and accumulate those thoughts to yourself. By the time you come to study it, you will have more understanding, more sensitivity on the way that the world works and what you think about it. And if you want, I'll answer the other question you didn't ask, which is what do future architects need to do? And that's a future for the next generation. I think that you, the next generation, we need to understand how we people meet and live in the future world. Post-pandemic, post-political issues, how we meet, how we get together, not because we can't get together now, but because I think with technology advancing, it's easy to think that we're connected to people via technology, via our Snapchat, Google, Facebook. I don't know if anyone's still doing Facebook today, but nothing will really replace human interaction, physical interaction. And on top of that, I'll add the obvious, our stewardship, I would say, towards the world, because building is a messy business and it uses a lot of resources, and resources finite. There's no extra amount of material in the world, and as we make that material, we exhaust, we emit CO2 into the atmosphere, and we know what the implications of that. So thinking of how we can make people meet together, make a society of people in the future without impacting our global, our global prosperity in a way. There is that.
It was a beautiful way to end on a sustainable future. Thank you so much for attending this week's career discovery session on architecture, and I'll see you next week with a completely new professional. Bye.